Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're tackling a subject that has fascinated, horrified, and honestly captivated historians for centuries: Aztecs' human sacrifice. Now, for a really long time, the dominant narrative around the Aztec Empire, which thrived from 1325 to 1521, has been painted with these incredibly broad, sensational strokes of just pure barbarism and savagery. But, as we're going to see today, when you step past those colonial stereotypes, you actually reveal a highly organized, deeply complex sociological and political framework. So let's dive right in and look at the actual data and historical context behind the blood-soaked altars of Mesoamerica.
130,000. I want to hook your attention immediately with this massive number. When the Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernán Cortés, rolled into the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan back in 1519, this was the terrifying estimate they reported back. They claimed to have found 130,000 human skulls stacked on this enormous wooden rack called a Tzompantli right in front of the Templo Mayor. To put that into perspective, that's like filling a massive modern sports stadium with nothing but skulls. For centuries, historians really questioned this number, suspecting it was just a massive exaggeration designed to justify the Spanish conquest.
Section 1. The Tower of Skulls. Let's investigate whether the shocking scale of these 16th century Spanish claims was just propaganda or actual historical reality.
To answer that, we turn to the hard science of today. Fast forward to 2015, modern archaeologists were excavating directly beneath a colonial-era building in downtown Mexico City. And you know what? They found it. They actually unearthed the remains of this massive Tzompantli skull rack, along with a flanking tower of skulls that measured nearly 5 meters across. Now, while that 130,000 estimate might have been logistically impossible for a single rack, the archaeological reality is that, thousands of skulls were indeed bound together with mortar in these imposing, terrifying towers.
Section 2. Repaying the Cosmic Death. Let's zoom out from the shocking archaeology and impartially examine the why by diving into the profound theological framework driving all this.
The absolute crucial point here is understanding the concept of Nextlahualiztli, which translates to cosmic debt. The Aztecs believed they were living in the era of the fifth sun. According to their mythology, the gods had literally sacrificed themselves by jumping into a fire just to create the sun. So to keep the sun moving across the sky and stop the universe from plunging into eternal darkness, humanity had to constantly nourish the gods. This repayment was made with human blood, which they beautifully yet chillingly referred to as sacred water. To them, sacrifice absolutely wasn't murder. It was a literal cosmic necessity for survival.
This whole concept of debt is perfectly illustrated by the vivid myth of Huitzilopochtli. Imagine a primordial, monstrous crocodile swimming in the chaotic early universe. The myth goes that to create the earth, the gods Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca physically tore this creature in half. The earth, the mountains, and the rivers were all formed from her body. But Tzompantli was constantly crying out in pain from being dismembered. So, to pacify her and ensure the earth continued to bear fruit, she demanded constant nourishment. And what did she want? Human blood and hearts.
Section 3. Rituals for the Gods. The Aztecs organized their 18-month calendar around these repayments, tailoring some incredibly visceral rituals to different gods. It is wild how methodically this violence was categorized. Take Huitzilopochtli, the war and sun god. His ritual was the classic extraction of a beating heart using a razor-sharp obsidian blade at the top of the pyramid. But then consider Tlaloc, the rain god. His rituals involved sacrificing young children on sacred mountains, because their tears were actually believed to physically summon the rain. For Totec, the god of spring, victims were flayed and priests would wear their skin for days to symbolize the earth putting on a fresh new layer of vegetation. And for Huitzilopochtli, the fire god, victims were anesthetized, thrown into a raging fire, and pulled out just before death to have their hearts removed. Every single detail was highly structured, intentional symbolism.
Perhaps the most fascinating and honestly tragic mini-story is that of the impersonator of Tezcatlipoca, the god of destiny and the night sky. A captive warrior would be chosen to literally become the living avatar of the god on earth. For a whole year, this guy lived a pampered life of absolute royalty. He was taught to play the flute, draped in jewels, and even married to 4 women representing goddesses. But then, on the final day, he would willingly climb the pyramid steps, breaking his flutes one by one on each step. It symbolized the end of his earthly joys before he voluntarily submitted to the sacrificial blade.
Section 4. Spectacle, control, and entertainment. Now, we need to shift from theology to sociology to see how these theocratic rituals functioned as mechanisms of raw political power.
To keep this massive system running, the Aztecs instituted Xochiyaoyatl, or the Flower Wars. Now, these were not your typical wars of conquest for new land. No, they were highly ritualized battles specifically designed to capture healthy, elite enemy warriors alive. Bringing these captives back elevated an Aztec warrior's social status immensely. Plus, the Aztec state would invite rival leaders to Tenochtitlan to watch these massive sacrifices. It was terrifying political propaganda. It effectively intimidated any would-be rebels by showing them exactly what happens to enemies of the empire.
Modern psychologists and sociologists suggest that for the Aztec public, watching these brutal events wasn't just a religious duty. It was actually a deeply ingrained form of societal management. Witnessing this provided physiological rewards, created a shared sense of identity, and helped manage the collective anxieties of the masses living in a pretty dangerous world. Coupled with the chanting, the dancing, and shamanic elements, it induced communally shared altered states of consciousness that intensely reinforced the absolute, unquestionable power of the Aztec state. Section 5. Beyond Human Sacrifice. To make sure we have a balanced historical picture, let's look at what religious life involved beyond the lethal rituals.
If you lived in Tenochtitlan, everyday devotions were rigorous. Both ordinary citizens and priests would routinely pierce their own skin with maguey thorns in a practice called auto-sacrifice. Offering your own blood was central to their faith. The culture was also heavily steeped in intense fasting, severe sleep deprivation, massive community-wide dances, and even crafting these giant statues of the gods out of amaranth dough, which were then broken apart and eaten communally. It was a deeply immersive daily spiritual life.
And the priests who orchestrated the whole shebang? They lived lives of severe, unimaginable austerity. Young boys entered the temple school, called the Kelmakok, at just 15 years old. There, they mastered the complex calendar systems and endured extreme hardships. We're talking night vigils, massive sleep deprivation, and strict rules dictating that they could never cut their hair or bathe. They were literally covered in soot and dried blood as a physical, undeniable manifestation of their intense devotion to the divine.
Section 6. Unearthing the Truth. Let's bring this explainer into the modern era and reveal how cutting-edge archaeology is finally separating historical fact from colonial exaggeration.
When we look at the hard data, the actual physical examinations of the skulls pulled from the modern Tzompantli excavations, it reveals a very definitive demographic breakdown. As you might expect, 75% of the victims were men, mostly prime-aged warriors between 20 and 35. But, and this is crucial, the data reveals that 20% were women and 5% were children. This absolutely proves that while captured enemy soldiers were the primary focus, women and children were actively included in this massive system, which perfectly aligns with historical records of slave purchases and specific deity requirements.
But where did these people actually come from? Well, isotopic analysis of their teeth and bones provides this incredible biological map of their lives. The isotopes show that victims were born all over Mesoamerica, likely as a result of those flower wars or tribute payments from conquered territories. However, the bone isotopes also reveal a fascinating twist. Many of these individuals lived in Tenochtitlan for months or even years before they were sacrificed. This proves they were deeply assimilated into the society before they ever met the priest's incredibly precise obsidian blades.
Ultimately, we're looking at two very starkly contrasting historical narratives here. On one side, you have the Spanish colonial narrative, which eagerly framed these practices as sheer demonic barbarism. Naturally, that framing was highly convenient for justifying their own violent conquest, the destruction of the temples, and the subjugation of the local population. On the flip side, we have the modern academic consensus. This view impartially understands Aztec sacrifice not as mindless violence, but as a highly organized, physiological, social, and political tool that was perfectly calibrated for maintaining cosmic order and building a massive empire.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought to chew on. We look back at the Aztecs, and we see a society that used visceral, public spectacle to manage collective anxieties, foster intense social bonding, and enforce state control. Now, while our methods have certainly and thankfully evolved, our underlying human psychological needs really haven't. So I have to ask you, how do our own modern societies manage collective anxieties and enforce social cohesion today? What are the rituals and spectacles of our era? Thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep asking the big questions.